Hey everybody, this is Mr. Mobbin coming at you with another APUSH video. Today we're taking a look at topic 1.4, which is focusing in on the impact of Spanish exploration on the Americas. Now, previously, we had talked about how exploration was, now kind of the hot new thing for those on the vanguard in terms of, trying to, find a way to get to Asia. We've talked previously about the exploits of the Portuguese, for example, like Da Gama, for example, and Henry the Navigator. But of course, today we're going to be taking a look at the person most famously or infamously associated with the spark of exploration by Europeans to the Americans, and it's this guy right here, Christopher Columbus. Italian by birth, but by the time we get to the late 1400s, was under the employ of the dual Spanish monarchs, Ferdinand and Isabella, pictured right here. Now, we've talked previously about how Ferdinand and Isabella are going to be basically taking the various states of the Iberian Peninsula, sans Portugal, and will be putting it together to create what we would call modern Spain. Now, note, this is not going to be the extent of what Ferdinand and Isabella want to do in terms of, the goals of Spain. They want to make Spain the top dog. And the idea being is that if they can be on the forefront of finding that route to Asia by sea as opposed to over land, that will give them a tremendous advantage over their rivals in Europe. And so they're going to be willing to take chances and invest, whereas other countries are not going to be quite as willing or able to do that. And with that being said, Christopher Columbus, who was a bit of a smooth kind of a salesman in terms of, promoting his skills and talents, will come to Ferdinand and Isabella and basically make the pitch that, yes, he is going to be able to find that water route to Asia. He's going to be able to sail west from Spain, west across the Atlantic, and hit Asia. And so, with that very effective sales pitch and the financial backing of the Spanish monarchs, Columbus is going to be setting sail, of course, in 1492 to try to make his way to Asia. Now, of course, we know that Columbus does not hit Asia. In fact, where does he hit? Well, he doesn't even hit America, and that's, I think, many Americans don't even realize that he never lands in what is going to be eventually the continental United States. As you can see here on his various voyages in the during the 1490s, you're going to be seeing him basically exploring what is going to be eventually known as the West Indies, and that's going to be, named in part by Columbus himself. You'll see here in his first voyage, he will be mostly taking a look at the island of Cuba. Now, we know that Columbus is going to he's going to think that he is somewhere near Asia. He knows that these are not, the Asians that he was looking for or anticipating. So these folks were not Chinese. But he does feel that he is in, somewhere out there. And so we start to see, eventually the term Indians, the Indies, etc., kind of coming from that initial notion. But of course, that initial voyage to Cuba is not going to be the only one. You can see here in, his second trip will be kind of bouncing around what's going to be the island of Hispaniola, Jamaica, modern-day Puerto Rico, and then you can see the third voyage, the third voyage, kind of getting once again near modern-day Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, and then the last voyage in the early 1500s, kind of bouncing around parts of Central America and modern-day Colombia, once again, tied to his name, before coming back. Now, Columbus is, of course, his impact cannot be overstated. We'll go into more detail about, Columbus's, exploits, but, he is going to see this as a way to try to make a lot of money for himself, give him a lot of influence in Spanish society, and most importantly, gain the full total confidence of the Spanish monarchy. And, when he goes there, he doesn't really quite get what he was looking for. Once again, there's not Asian spices. There's not in the West Indies, just, tons and tons of gold and silver and other precious metals and resources. But he will have some clout. He will kind of dub himself the colonial leader, in that area. In the end, for Columbus, he really doesn't become particularly wealthy. He'll eventually fall out of favor with the monarchy in Spain. He's not going to have nearly as much success as many of those that will follow him, but understand his ability to land in the Western Hemisphere, once again, cannot be overstated because it will spark massive change. And that is why we're going to dub this beginning of a clashing of societies, the Western Hemisphere and the Eastern Hemisphere, with Columbus's name. This is going to spark the beginning of what we call the Columbian Exchange. And for many folks, this is the most significant, if not cataclysmic, hinge in world history. For many historians, there really is, two parts of history, before Columbus and after Columbus. Because prior to Columbus, you basically have these two basically totally separate worlds, the Eastern Hemisphere and the Western Hemisphere. And even though it had not been that way always, we know about the land bridge and whatnot, but that separation reality had been for so long that basically these were two totally different planets, for lack of a better term, at least in terms of how it had so little impact on the other. But that's going to change dramatically, starting with what Columbus does and the various exploration efforts by many others, on down the line throughout the 1500s into the 1600s. And, when we take a look at this Columbian Exchange, if you pull up this map right here, you'll see that, this is going to be showing a transfer of goods, resources, etc., to both sides. It's an exchange. Both sides are going to get access and exposure to things that they had never had before. Some of these are going to be beneficial. Other things, horrific. If you first take a look at what Columbus's voyages will spark, you'll see all the various things that were native to the Western Hemisphere making their way to Europe. Things like tobacco. Europeans had never had access to tobacco. They never smoked tobacco until the Columbian Exchange. Many of the things that we associate with the first Thanksgiving are, native Western Hemisphere things. Pumpkins, turkeys, squash, etc. Cacao beans, chocolate, that's not in Europe yet until after the Columbian Exchange. I find in particular there are some interesting things like, for example, potatoes, which are not native to Europe, but because of the potatoes' impact, it will eventually be very strongly associated with a European country and culture, Ireland. Tomatoes are not native to the Eastern Hemisphere. And following Columbus's voyages, that Columbian Exchange, we now very closely associate tomatoes with Italian cooking. For many folks, the notion of Italian cooking without tomatoes in it seems, mind-boggling. But yeah, prior to Columbus, that was not the case. So understand that there's going to be a ton of things that are going to be changing European life dramatically, be it culinary or in terms of just, viable, sellable goods and resources like tobacco, that are going to be very significant. But of course, you're going to see this is a two-way street. You can see things coming from the Eastern Hemisphere that will make their way to the Western Hemisphere following this Columbian set of voyages. For example, coffee is not native to the Western Hemisphere, but with the Columbian Exchange, coffee makes its way to the Western Hemisphere, and it's going to have a tremendously massive effect. If you go to Colombia, Colombia is world-renowned today for coffee production. That doesn't happen without the Columbian Exchange. Citrus fruits are not native to the Western Hemisphere, but as a result of the Columbian Exchange, you think of places like Florida, for example, and California, where you see, oranges grown in large quantities. That's a result of the exchange. Sugar cane is not native to the Western Hemisphere, comes over from the East, and that's going to dramatically redefine the West Indies, as we'll talk about later, Louisiana, big sugar areas, and, for example, also, many of the livestock that we are familiar with are not native to the Western Hemisphere. Cattle, sheep, pigs, horses, none of those things existed in the Western Hemisphere prior to Columbus's voyages. And that's going to dramatically change how we live. For example, we think of, the Plains Indians, the Plains tribes, like the Sioux, for example, on horseback. That doesn't happen without the Columbian Exchange. But of course, most infamously, is going to be the exposure to disease that the Europeans will bring over that the Western Hemisphere had not had before. As you can see here on this map, things from smallpox to typhus to, measles and malaria are not native to the West, but will be brought over by the East. And its impact is going to be nothing short of apocalyptic. Folks that had no natural immunity to these diseases are going to be exposed, and we will see a dramatic decline in native population over the next 100 years. By the time we get to about 1600, 90% of the native population that had been exposed to the Eastern Hemisphere were going to be dead. So you could make a very strong argument that the Columbian Exchange is the most significant, most impactful thing on human civilization. That's a very bold statement, but as you can see here, there's a lot of evidence to kind of back that up. But beyond the Columbian Exchange, there's also going to be, as a result of the impact of Columbus's initial voyages and the subsequent voyages by many others, it's going to change economics massively. And in many respects, it's going to be that spark the transition from the Middle Ages to modern times. The Middle Ages, as many of you know, is going to be defined economically by the system of feudalism, where, wealth and status and power was all defined by land, how much land somebody owned. But that's going to start to change. As we see, through the colonization process, etc., you're going to be able to get access to resources that you would not have had on traditional pieces of land in Europe. And so now you're going to start to see wealth and power be associated not as much on land anymore, but on money. What can you get with your resources? You can get money. You can have the power of somebody that used to have a lot of land without having a lot of land, because now you've got money. The nobles have got the land locked down, but you could be someone that came from, more humble origins, would not have access to that land, but now you're going to have that kind of wealth and power because of access to resources. This is going to spark transcontinental trade, that is going to give rise to a merchant class that will, at least in terms of financial status, rival the nobility in some of these cases. Now, granted, status is more than just money, but it's going to be something that just didn't exist prior to that. And of course, as we see this opportunity to get access to resources and make money, this is going to be seen as a fantastic set of investment opportunities, which will give rise to institutions that we call joint stock companies. Basically, a group of investors that will pool their money together to finance these colonial expeditions, exploratory expeditions to the West, with the assumption that they're going to get, X percentage of the resources that are obtained. So that's going to spark even more colonization, even more exploration, and allow people that didn't quite have the same access to make a lot of money in the past under feudalism. Now we're going to start to do this. And this new period is, going to be called capitalism. The idea of being who's got the most money. The individuals with the most money are going to have the most power, and you don't have to have the land to have the money and the power like you used to under feudal times. So, ladies and gentlemen, the sparking of connecting the East and the West is going to be nothing short of revolutionary. And no, we're just starting to kind of scratch the surface as to what the impacts are going to be long term. So we'll leave it there for now. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.